The song that the choir sang is taken from the scriptural passage of Peter attempting to walk on water and the fear that he experienced. And of course, the gospel lesson we read today is largely about fear. And so that's what we want to talk about today, and I kind of have a hunch that I'm not the only one here that has experienced fear in my life, and maybe will still continue to experience some fear as I go along on this daily living journey. You know, there was a time in my life, I have to admit, and again, I kind of doubt that I'm the only one here who can say this, that I was largely consumed for periods of time or for a long period of time with fear. In fact, I think about me, it could honestly be said that I was afraid I wouldn't have anything to be afraid about. It seemed that I liked to worry. I enjoyed worrying. Fear, well, could have been my password, and my middle name could have been spelled impending doom. And biblically, we learn about fear from the very beginning in the book of Genesis. Adam and Eve, as you recall, had eaten the forbidden fruit from the garden. And that was something that God had strictly forbidden for them to do. And so they knew that he knew. And they were hiding out, trying to avoid him because they knew he was coming looking for them. And they experienced big-time fear. Kind of like maybe some of you had an experience when you were a child. Maybe you had done something. Maybe you had broken Mama's favorite crystal or something. You had done something wrong. And you were hiding out because you knew you were in big time trouble when they found you. Do you remember what Adam said when God confronted him and asked him why he was hiding? Adam told him the truth. He said, "Because I was afraid." You see, fear is so very basic to our being of humans. To be human is to experience fear. I doubt, nor have I ever talked to any human who doesn't know what it feels like to experience fear. Sometimes we feel like we're afraid of everything. We're afraid of ourselves. We're afraid of people. We're afraid of the future. We're afraid of the past life catching up to us. We're afraid of death. You know, living in fear is an awful way to live. I wonder how many people we know today who fear getting sick or getting old, and they don't have sufficient resources available. How many people in some major cities or some specific types of business hate to go to work out of their fear of terrorism? How many people in our public schools, parents or teachers and employees, hate to go to work, to school, because they're afraid of somebody coming in and shooting the place up like they have in so very many of our schools and churches and businesses in recent years? Over and over and over again, the message in the Bible is fear not. When Abram took his family to the promised land, he feared that he was leaving all that he knew and all of his security in life behind him. And he was heading into the unknown. And then God spoke to him. And he said, Abram, I am your shield, and your reward will be great. When the Jews stood at the Red Sea and they could see Pharaoh's chariots chasing them on the horizon, they cried out that they would all be slaughtered. And yet Moses said to them, stand still, fear not, and see the salvation of the Lord. When the angel of the Lord came to Mary, and he said that she would bear a child, she trembled with fear. What would become of her, she asked of the angel, and the angel said, fear not, Mary, for you have found favor with God. You know, I've seen some people who are so traumatized by their fears, their past and their current fears, that they're absolutely unable to do anything about that situation. I call it the paralysis of analysis. Fear can be a real paralyzer, and it can keep us from being all that God has created us to be. As simple as the solution sounds, to be free from fear, it is not easy to do. The solution is simply to let go of our fears and let God handle them. To surrender our fears to God, and then simply to pray for an increase of faith. Of faith, which is really the antidote to fear, a faith in God. In 1933, newly elected President Franklin D. Roosevelt told us all we needed to know about fear. It was true in 33 and it's true in 2013. All we need to know is this: the only thing we have to fear is fear itself, nameless, unreasoning, unjustified terror which paralyzes needed efforts to convert retreat into advance. The 12-step programs call fear by a name that's an acronym, false expectations appearing real. God says that the real antidote for fear is faith in God. Are not 2 sparrows sold for a cent? And Jesus says to us, and yet not one of them will fall to the ground without the Father, but the very hairs of your head are all numbered. Therefore, do not fear. You are of far more value than the sparrows. You see, many of our fears would just simply disappear and they would be gone if we knew down deep that we were loved, accepted, and secure. And that comes about faith in God, who will always be a loving parent for all of us. Why do we fear failure, rejection, intimacy? Is it not because perhaps we have great insecurity within ourselves, within our own souls? How much could you or could I or anybody else accomplish if we could be relieved of all fears and all anxieties? If we truly, truly believed that God is with us. If you knew that, what you do really matters, that you would be accepted regardless of whatever came down the pike, no matter what the outcome, you would be loved. You see, a good part of substituting faith for fear involves confronting our fears and to recognize them for what they are, perhaps false expectations appearing real, and to remember that we have God on our side. When Peter was full of fear in his various trials, particularly walking on the water, I expect God was whispering in his ear, whispering for him to stop letting his imagination run wild. Many of us do that. We let our imagination run wild to the point it magnifies our fears. And we need to remember that that storm that we are encountering certainly can be great, but God is greater. Our fears can indeed run wild, and they can cause wild imaginations about bad things can be. I remember a time in the 1960s, and maybe you remember that with me, when there was a bomb scare in the United States, and it triggered the sale of bomb shelters. Over 500,000 bomb shelters were sold in this country in that period of time. Not one of them was used to avoid a bomb. But that shows you our fear level, 500,000. I have a friend who continues to remind me when I am fearful that I should simply turn loose of whatever the situation is bothering me at the time and hand it over to God. Sounds simple. Sometimes it isn't so simple. And I am supposed to say in those times, right now it's okay. Turn loose. Right now I haven't gone hungry. Right now I'm not in jail. Right now I'm not in the hospital. Right now my loved one, even though they may be sick, is still alive and well. Right now, it's okay. Turn loose. And as Peter in the boat in that famous story talks about, he knows that the Lord can sustain him. He knows that he can do that even in the middle of the storm when there is nothing but uncertainty. And so when there is nothing but uncertainty around us in our life, we need to have that kind of faith that tells us and assures us, right now it's okay, God will be with us. He will take care of us in all of our storms. But we should also know that faith is a risk-taking enterprise. It doesn't come in a perfect package. Most of us, me included, often catch ourselves caught midway between doubt and faith. The problem is that too much doubt can sink us. Peter got caught in that too much doubt. He got caught between Christ and the crest of the waves, and he sinks. And that's a great story, a great tale about the church as well as about our weaknesses. We have some good news that we can remember that are so true from that story. And it tells us that whenever we become bogged down in fear, that's when we sink. If we take our gaze off of God and His grace, we will sink. You know, last week I mentioned that Jesus, as He said His prayers in the garden, was not praying a prayer of intervention, asking God the Father to intervene, to stop what was about to happen. That's not what the story was about. The prayers were prayers for empowerment, for Jesus to know how to handle the situation, how to face whatever it is that He was troubling. And so that's our prayer about fears, is not that God in some magical way will make the fears go away, that He will make the problem go away that's creating the fears. The prayer is for our empowerment, that we will know how to exist and to deal with whatever that situation is, to face the fear. And you know, it usually is when we're in the storm and we realize the wind is in our face and that storm is raging. That's when it causes the fear and the doubt. And we do have to remember God will be with us. The psalmist wrote, "When I am afraid, I put my trust in you." Well, let me ask you this. Where else are you going to go? If the bottom of the stock market drops out tomorrow, well, it won't tomorrow because I think the stock exchange is closed for Martin Luther King, so you're safe another day. But if it drops out on Tuesday, God is still going to be the same. God is a God who is the same today, yesterday, and tomorrow. If we go to war with another country this week, God is still going to be the same. God does not change. If you get a bad medical report, where are you going to go? God is going to be the same. Right now, it's okay. Turn loose. There's a story that's told of Bishop Warren Chandler and the School of Theology at Emory University was named after him. And I've read a lot about him. He is a pastor who's very close to one of our main disciple preachers that I utilize for commentary. And Bishop Chandler was laying on his deathbed, and he was asked by a friend of his, "Please tell me frankly, do you fear crossing the river of death?" And Bishop Chandler replied, "No. Why would I be afraid of that? I belong to the Father who owns the land on both sides of the river. In life, there are storms, but God is with us. That is our great salvation and a hope." I want you to know and to believe this morning that God cares if you are immobilized by some fear in your life. But there comes a time, just like everything else, you finally have to face your fears and you have to place them at the foot of the cross and then just lean back. Lean back into the ever-loving arms of a loving God, and that gracious God will encircle you and come to you. I don't know what kind of a storm in life that you may have going on in your life this week. What kind of a storm that you might be enduring this day. What kind of a storm you have in the future. And you know that you will have such a storm sometime in the future. But I do know this. I know that even as that storm rages around you, whenever it might be, if you will listen very carefully, listen with your heart, you will probably hear a very gentle voice calling you. Take heart. It is I. Do not be afraid. And in time the storm will pass, and God will be there. And then you too can echo the words of that wonderful old hymn, God will take care of you. Yes, He will take care of you. Amen.